I'm at my mum's house.
That's nice.
Still 11 years old, whatever.
Yes. Which room are you in? You're not in your bedroom, are you?
What?
You're not with the posters?
I'm at my mum's house.
Oh, the mum's, yeah,
That's
because
nice.
it could have the, you know, that thing where it might still have the posters on the wall.
I would love that, but she immediately moved the moment I left home. That bitch.
They do that. I tell you what, that's quite normal.
Yeah.
They just wait for you to go. No, that happened to me as well.
Oh, really?
So will people be looking at us?
Yes, I think they're in the room now, so you're welcome to start your session whenever you're ready. I'm going to turn myself off and leave it to you guys. Thank you for doing this session.
Thank you for having us.
Yes,
thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Well, so I'm going to press something called continue. Is that okay? Is that what other people are pressing? Good. I love that. My girls, they're putting the thumbs up. Do I have to? Can you hear me? Yes. Are we on? Great. So thank you so much. It's so exciting. We can't see you, but apparently you can see us, which will probably be a joy, just sitting up straight. So exciting for the three of us to be at the Stay at Home Festival. Absolutely thrilled because the two best top funny women authors are in the room with me. We've got Lucy Vine rocking at her mother's house.
I was dancing, Helen. How
dancing from a seated position. And then we've got Abby Mann with smocking that I said was very 80s because I relate to 80s and there's a resurgence. So they will speak, obviously. They're not just going to mime. But no, and so the task of our little window today is one to celebrate the amazing novels, the new novels that are coming in with Lucy and Abigail. They're not coming in, they're just going to be published, they're not coming in to this room. Clearly they're going to be published in June. I can't wait to hear about that. I've talked to both Abby and Lucy. We're connected from Comedy Women in Print, and that we've got like quite open conversations on the Quip website called Witty Wednesdays, where I've talked to both of them over a glass. Mine was Carver and Cassis. I don't know what either of those had, but yeah. So we can revisit there. Quip, Comedy Women in Print. Right. Very briefly, I set up Quip. Well, I've been working on it for 5 years. I wrote a comedy novel. We've got to all display our novels. This one nobody remembers because it's 60, might be 60 years old. We've got Lucy's last one. Are we nearly there yet? Can't wait to hear Lucy's next one. And then Abigail's Lonely Fajita. So there's just three, like, just hold the books up. Now that's not being boastful. Yes, and the next one, Bad Choices, from Lucy's next one, I have to talk to about Bad Choices. So the other two are writing concurrently funny fiction. I wrote a funny fiction. I looked around for a prize to win. There were none. I had been a judge on various prizes, so I kind of knew how it worked. And the only comedy literary prize in the UK, as it says on Wikipedia, is the P.G. Wodehouse Prize. And yes, they did nominate losing it, which was a joy. I've never won anything, but nominated is fine. And this is probably a statistic that is out of date because I couldn't do the maths, but 14 years ago, in its 14-year history, but it's older than that, so this is a slight lie, there've only been 3 women winners, and 13 were nominated. So it's quite a low statistic, but that's not completely true because it's completely changed in the last 2 or 3 years because women are writing more and more comedy books, and more and more women are winning. So it is extraordinary, just in a 2-year period, how the landscape really is changing. So everybody's writing a comedy book, it seems. But it was I'd like to think that it's not just like the cancel culture where people are being influenced in that way. I think it's just through example of positivity that it is becoming normal to have more women at once being recognised for doing what they were always doing, but now they are being published and recognised in what is inevitable but needs some pushes of Quip. I think I've put that extremely succinctly on the vodka. Thank you. So now we're going to actually just discuss properly from these two amazing practicing or prolific authors about what is funny and you know, how they are career writers. I mean, so successful. Lucy Vine, 4th book now, been writing for just a few years, which is amazing. So you must be writing like a book a week.
I'm
throwing
a book away a week as well, Helen.
Well, so we want to hear the pain, because otherwise we might not like you. We need both. Not that we can. we need the balance. And your latest one is called Bad Choices. Need to hear about that. And then Abigail was the runner-up. That sounds awful, runner-up, but actually when you think about how many people enter, it's like 5 trillion.
Better than long-listed, just to say.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to say long-listed because there's kind of like, but long-list, but I think you're all senior to being nominated.
Yeah.
So I think between us, we agreed earlier, ladies and gentlemen, if I can say that, that, you know, winning is kind of so over because you just get forgotten. It's just a one-off thing. We are still there. I've been nominated, you've been longlisted, and you're both writing a lot. And Abigail's 2nd book is coming out, and both your books are coming out in June. And Abigail's 2nd book is called Sisters Surprise. I said that in an effective way. Obviously, it's not pronounced.
I really liked how you said that.
Surprise. So Lucy, everything to ask you, but what made you decide to be a comedy fiction writer? What, you know, when you just did your first one?
I don't know if it was a sort of conscious decision. It's just kind of a lot of who I am. I've been writing as a journalist for 15 years, and a lot of what I wrote, I have written serious stuff, but the funny thing just always came much more naturally to me. It's just more fun, isn't it? And it's also kind of probably my safe place. Like writing too seriously, people might take it seriously and they might, you know, give me criticism and feedback. I don't want any of that. I just want compliments and to make people laugh. So I think, it was the sort of natural fit for me, and it's just such a joy to write funny. I've actually been trying to write in a different genre recently, just as an experiment, and like the initial feedback was, why are you putting jokes in this thriller? And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that.
So that's interesting. So the different genre one, was that external to Bad Choices?
Yeah, so this is a recent thing for me. I'm just trying to do something a bit different, try something else, you know, try and write in a completely different way.
But your natural fit, which you know is but why? Is it because I
think I'm just a really absurd person.
Absurd.
Yeah, and I find things funny. I love laughing. It's the best thing ever. I know most people hate laughing. It's a stupid thing to say.
Yes, why would you laugh?
Laughing. But it's just really, it's the best feeling when somebody messages you and says that you made them laugh.
Yes, and I know that your books have done that. I mean, I'm not just saying that. I mean, your hit rate is really high, so people now expect that from you. I mean, because you go, it's not just talking about the loser, but you are an expert on the loserdom in society.
I'm an expert loser. Helen, can I put that on my book?
I think if it helps, if it contributes to becoming shortlisted. No. So we know that so we've got that. We're going to get snapshots. So we've got. I totally identify with you, Lucy. I nearly said loser.
That's what I thought you were going to say.
Sorry.
This is like school all over again.
No, I covered myself. I covered myself.
Being a loser is why I turned to funny, Helen.
Exactly. So the loser is in us all, is possibly a universality to being able to laugh at ourselves and then invite other people to laugh at our observations. So Abigail, where do you come on that, on the why you found that you had to write comedy?
I completely agree. I feel like comedy is the acceptable face of being a loser, isn't it? Yes. And again, I think it was it's what came most naturally, and but it wasn't through it. I didn't start off trying to do that, I suppose. I wanted to write a book, and I had this sort of period where I was a teacher. So I was a teacher up in Yorkshire.
We could tell you're a teacher because like you're organized, and and possibly speaking for Lucy, I mean, it is a joy to be in the company of somebody who's organized and funny. Double whammy.
I know, rare,
yeah.
Right?
So you started as a teacher, yeah?
Yeah, started as a teacher. And to be honest, I mean, the thought of doing stand-up is not as scary as having to sort of stand in front of 15-year-olds and be like, so Macbeth and like those, so many sort of texts that I suppose I was teaching are really funny, and the best way to sort of connect with anybody is to sort of try and make them find the funny in something. And so I think I did it perhaps as a survival technique when I was teaching, to try and help teenagers relate to what it is that I was talking about. And Shakespeare is hilarious. And I mean, I was about to say Charlotte Bronte is, but I mean, not really.
But how did you do that? Did you put yourself down, or I mean, how are you highlighting that element?
Oh yeah, I think this is something that I learned during my years teaching, is the best way to sort of connect with somebody else is to just sort of own the voice that you have, and I did that a lot with the youngsters and the young people, and took mickey out of myself, because at least if you do it first, then they can't do it. But then when I wanted to write, I was trying to write a historical novel first, and I mean, you're spending hours a day doing it and thinking about it, and I just became a total misery, basically. Just a nightmare to live with. Everyone was walking on eggshells around me because I was just so melancholy all the time. Like, I really encapsulated the idea of being a sort of tuberculosis-ridden Victorian woman, and turns out it's not the best vibe people want to be around.
Is it funny, Lucy?
Sounds funny to me.
We would have maybe you could make that funny. I personally would avoid that as a kind of go-to for hilarity purpose. But so I'm sensing where you're going with that. I'm sensing that quite soon we're going to realize that this canvas was not the one. So
not the one. Not the one for the time. I just took it on too much. So instead asked my mum. I was about to say my mum at the time. Yeah, like I have a different one now. Same mum. Yeah. What she thought, like, this is the kind of stuff I should write, and she said, something funny, and that then just I stopped trying to swim upstream, and that's just what came naturally afterwards.
So you're naturally, so it's been confirmed by your own flesh and blood that you are naturally funny. So the mother is the oracle. So basically we're saying that to the success that both of you have got relatively fast is that you are kind of what is it, you see the absurd. I mean, I'm remembering like Lucy's books, it's like it is kind of disaster. But do you ever, being critical now, do you ever think, does it have to be plausible? How do you make your readers stay with you? You know, it can't just be a catalogue of like people being incompetent, although incompetence is funny.
I think that TV is allowed to do this so much more than books. The absurdity that we see in TV series and sitcoms and everything, you know that wouldn't really happen. But with books, and I pushed it much further, I think, with my first book, because I knew I couldn't keep doing it.
What's the title of the first one?
First one was Hot Mess.
Hot Mess, of course.
Yeah.
I know Hot Mess, I've got it. But I've lent it to someone. No, but it's obviously because of Quip. It's brilliant. Yeah.
But I definitely, in that first edit, was trying to probably push absurd things a little bit more. And there was a bit of a pushback, like that wouldn't happen. And I know it wouldn't happen. But I just think TV is allowed to get away with it so much more than literature. And if anything, I think that we should be more absurd a lot of the time with our.
Excellent.
It doesn't have to always be the case, but I think that we should be allowed a little bit more artistic license in some of our.
Right. So I'll throw. That's a really interesting point. I'll throw that to Abby, because like if you think about Phoebe, you mentioned TV. So everybody, all the books now are Phoebe Waller-esque. You know, I mean, because that's been a benchmark, and that is absurd in the fact that somebody is now talking to the camera and then we're expecting her to be an actress. So she's breaking walls, she's doing stuff. Okay, so can't remember the point, but throwing to Abby about the Phoebe, why do you believe in Phoebe Waller-Bridge's TV persona? What was the attraction about that? 2 questions. And 1B, how can we relate that?
I love Helen so much. Yes,
that stanza to come more into our novels. You know, should we be liberated, as Lucy is suggesting, to be more like break the wall, but the literary wall? Short question.
Yeah,
I have no idea what the question is.
No, but Abby's a teacher. She'll jump in.
Yeah, I can make sense of this. This is fine. No, I think, well, the one thing with sort of Fleabag, and like Lucy was saying, and you're allowed to get away with so much more on TV, and I think what I have found with sort of perceptions of that sort of thing, if it was in a narrative, in a novel sense, is you're not just taking the action at face value, as perhaps you are on TV, and you're laughing at things almost in a slapstick way, or oh thank God that wasn't me sort of way. But in a novel, because you're spending so much time with a character, a protagonist, especially because a lot of comedy is written in first person, it invites criticism of the actions of that character, or the morality of them, or the ethics of what they have done. And perhaps that's just the frame of mind that people go into when they're reading fiction rather than watching comedy. That it is, I suppose that's why novels were initially like created, weren't they, is to sort of evaluate someone's behavior over time. And quite often that's the difficult thing about writing comic fiction, is that you're wanting to sort of take someone along. You also want to create empathy with your main character. You also want them to laugh at them, but not in a mean way. So there's so much like balancing going on. But I think it's the situations, like Lucy was mentioning, it's the whether or not the situation needs to be something that happened. But I think I had the opposite problem with The Lonely Fajita, in that there were some elements of things that I had experienced in internships when I first came to London that my agent and editor said was too unrealistic to put in, and that wouldn't fly. So it is that kind of that balancing act all the time.
So you mean do you have to kind of manipulate what you really want to write into what is plausible, and that isn't doing what Lucy's adventuring into? Like, now you've got your narrative voice, haven't you? Like, whoa. And how you could, I mean, maybe you could suddenly become an astronaut on another planet? Would that be your 5th book, possibly? Is that an idea? I mean, do you want to go kind of surreal and strange? Do you need your heroine to be funny? Go.
You mentioned before, when we were off air, that you've been doing some acting work again.
Yeah.
What do you find? Do you find TV funny different to when you're reading? What do you find funny in books and TV? And do you mind the absurdity in TV more than you would in books?
You see, that's why you're a very good journalist, very good writer. It's interesting because
it's of both. So I'm super curious about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, a way to look at it is trying. The $1 million question is, what makes us laugh out loud on the page? So all we've got is, I've just got this book called Blokes Jokes. I thought if there was a lull, I'd just read some out. Possibly won't ever get to that book. But the thing is,
I'm fascinated. Where has this bloke jokes book come
Well, I
from?
wanted to work out if things were sexist or not. If we get into that, I just want to get your feedback because of the
we should
culture.
do that.
Like, how do we invert things? Like, where are we at in what we can and can't say? I'm just fascinated of this constraint, but or not. And are we changing things as much as we think we are? All those questions. But when you're reading print, it's just words. What elicits that sneeze of laughter? What, like when people read your books on the tube, and my dream was that somebody would be reading, losing it, and everyone would see this again going, I wanted that to happen.
Yeah, I did that.
It's from the brain and the thing. And now, whereas that's what I was going to ask you. Do your protagonist people have to be likable for you to then laugh? So let's go, or as women, do we have to be likable to, go.
Sorry, it's just, those are two big questions.
Yes.
And I think they're sort of separate things to address. I definitely think, like, for me personally, sorry, Abby, I feel like I'm doing too much talking about.
No, we're all jumping in all over.
Yeah.
Go.
But for me, the thing that makes me laugh, it's that sort of horrible relatability thing, that horrible, it's actually, there's that incredible Alan Bennett quote, the best moments in reading are when you come across something, a thought, a feeling, a way of looking at things, which you had thought special and particular to you. Now here it is, set down by someone else, a person you have never met, someone even who is long dead, and it is as if a hand has come out and taken yours. I just read that.
I could see you reading it, but how lovely.
Amazing. It's my favourite part, and I always think of it when somebody messages me about some stupid little line that I thought was just some stupid internal thing that people would be like, what the hell? And it's quite often the same thing that comes up, and they're like, I thought that was just me, I thought that was just in my head, and you actually... So
you connect, it is all about connection, and that you open, that you made the person feel less lonely. I think is comedy, I would say you're just not lonely because
that thing where you recognize something that you really didn't realize. For me, it's often that thing of like, I didn't realize this was other people as well. And also kind of silliness and shockingness. I guess it depends on your sense of humor, but for me, I'm quite an absurd, silly person, so almost the sillier the situation or the joke, the better for me.
It sits perfectly for me. And then but then what happens, given humor is so broad that what someone will recognize through their own associative connections with your words and all the implications is not, what is funny for you may not be funny for someone else. Absolutely. So what do we do with that? How do we handle the differentness of people's perceptions of what is funny, Abby?
It's not something that you can think about, especially in the writing process. You can't even entertain that as an idea because it's so crippling, and you end up just having analysis paralysis over everything that you're writing. And I think when it comes to communicating humor, if you are finding it funny just because of the human nature in that that there's going to be someone else in the world who also connects on that same point, so if you're reading something back and you're like, oh, that situation would really make me laugh, or that situation is so horribly awkward, I can imagine telling someone about that later over like a coffee or a drink, you know that you've sort of made a connection at that point. So I think the best thing to do is just only take compliments from people who know.
I love that. You wrestled that really brilliantly, because I realized I'd thrown you a really negative, horrible, projected, insecure question, and you beautifully turned it around and threw it back, because you're absolutely right. We can't go into our souls when it goes wrong, we're thinking of the voice on the shoulder going, you twat, you who do you think you are? But how would you address the fact that what I'm getting at, okay, the answer is, I think, is that you've got to connect with that person. So if you think the person is not authentic, chances are, in your own vision of it, you'll go, oh, I get what they're doing. But don't you still want to kind of love your, I just love your voice, you know, you want to have a bit of love with the narrator's voice, do you think? Or is it possible to replicate? Is it possible nowadays to replicate and just write more and more books that were like Phoebe or whoever is, you know, a star at the time?
No, I think I just think that if currently in the past few years especially, the confidence that has come through, I think, from female writers when they're tackling comedy and topics that they own, that is they're part of their own lived experience, is incredibly empowering, because I think so much historically speaking, women's interests and experiences have been sort of the butt of the joke as opposed to sort of the actual story. That this is so much a time for shining a light on that, but also not seeing it as this sort of homogenous unit of women's humour, because there's so many nuances involved in it. And I think specifically comedy and humour generally, and I'm sure, Helen, you've got so much to say about this, but it's, I think,
try not to, it's about
you. Mayall comedy is so often seen as, if it's neutral, if it's coming from a man's voice, and women's comedy is niche. And that, I think, over the past few years we've just seen so much more coming through, where it's not going to be something to highlight, hopefully, in the future, that will all just
we can normalize it. What do you think, Lucy, about that? With do you think there's been a sort of proliferation of similar types of writing in the last few years?
Well, I think that we are making progress. I think that society and women are changing in how they see themselves, and I think women themselves are changing much faster than society as a whole. I think that we no longer care so much about being liked. I mean, of course, we want to be liked, but for the right reasons a bit more, if that makes sense. Like, I don't mind, I want to be liked for being a nice person and doing the right thing and stuff, but I don't care if I'm disliked because some man thinks I should be at home having babies. Like, get back to your basement. Like, that's fine. You can dislike me all you like on Twitter. That's fine. We used to be, I think, more afraid, and I think society used to be afraid of having female characters that were unlikable. So it's interesting. My mum was been rewatching Desperate Housewives recently.
Oh,
and
right.
She was saying to me the other day how much she hates the Susan Meyer character, the Terry Hatch character. And I thought that was so interesting, because I remember at the time when it came out, she was the big ticket actress. She was the one we were supposed to be rooting for. She was the likable, goofy, like adorable, clumsy. And we had quite a lot of that for a long time. Like, that if our female characters were going to, if we had a sort of star female character, and if they were pretty, then they had to be like clumsy. They had to fall over and be adorable and get themselves locked out in case Mike comes by, you know, like. And we don't seem to care so much about that anymore. I feel like we're allowing our female characters to be utter shits, and that's fine. And we don't mind so much if there's a sort of a bit of a backlash to that.
No, I think that's so interesting. I don't want to, no, carry on. I don't want to interrupt you.
No, I mean, that's kind of all I was going to say. And because I do think male authors have been allowed to write completely unlikable protagonists and characters for however long, and we're only just starting to get there. I think we are there, and it's been amazing. Like, the books I get sent now, like, they just blow me away. Like, it's so funny. It's actually like horrible, because it makes me never want to write again. Every time I read another book by like you guys, any of these amazing female writers that are working today, it's just wonderful.
But that's amazing. So there is more. I mean, men probably, I mean, it is worthwhile making comparisons, if only to understand that we have evolved. So that's quite an optimistic, and I think really rapidly. Honestly, there are just more and more books. Men, you know, because there were so few female comedians at the beginning, we were all compared to each other. Like I was supposed to be like Jenny Eclair, or she was, but why? Because we're just people, and we happen to be maybe working slightly funnier than me, but anyway, no. But you know, but it was like everybody wanted to ask those questions. Here's the thing, it's about changing the conversation as well, that we would be required to talk about what it was like being a female comedian. Like we had to have an answer, we had to have an explanation, we had to justify it. Ultimately, that's the subtext. And I think with wit, which is what Comedy Women in Print is, it wants to celebrate with in all its forms, in all its many forms, is quite a divide and rule, because I've been in Zoom meetings on other subjects, and if you do make a joke and it's all men, there is a kind of we're not as far as we think we are socially, with women kind of being a bit bawdy. We're not. What do either of you does that reflect?
I think Helen, it's time for you to say the word penis.
Ladies and gentlemen, I did just say that earlier on, just because but you see,
how many people leave?
But we weren't, but it was a symbol of to explain that better, in terms of
explanation. We can just say the word penis, it's fine, Helen.
But I wanted to go off grid. I was thinking I needed to connect. So how do you connect? And it was like a connectable thing for us. So if we go back to like words and novels, and your very clever question about, you know, what makes us laugh from reading something, it's somehow the order of that sentence, where it comes in the plot, the character who says it, what they've gone through before. It's all about connecting, and that's quite a loving thing to do, whereas men, I think men don't require that, because historically it's more normal for them to have audacity and be leaders, and they wouldn't question it, and they wouldn't compare themselves to each other, because there's room for them all. There's just room for so many men. Whereas I think we're talking about getting women employed and published. I think it's a huge. I don't think we're as advanced as we think we are, but there are certainly more women writing. Would you say not comparable? Are there more women writing comedy books now, comedy fiction, apart from you and Abigail?
I mean, it's
ever novelists in the world.
It's hard to say, because obviously what ends up on the shelf is not necessarily the how much is being written, but I think we're seeing it more across genres as well, where there's like a fantasy series that my partner's sister is reading, and she's a teenager, which she says is really darkly comic. I remember the books that I read all the Georgia Nicholson books written by Louise Renison growing up. They are actually really darkly comic as well. And I think it's not just that you have comedy coming through across genres and across fiction written by women, but also that the nature of that comedy isn't necessarily what anyone would consider palatable. Like it has so much like light and shade in it. So I think you're seeing it definitely across genres. And something that I've noticed as well is as like a social media user and user of Instagram, is that there are some really funny female, I would consider them female writers who are using sort of caption space on Instagram to just be absolutely hilarious and to cut their teeth at comedy on a platform that is really accessible, that is very low risk, and that's just offered another way for writers to sort of test their material.
More. So basically, I think we're in a bit of a revolutionary phase. Then we are actually being evidenced that, well, Instagram, I still struggle with that, obviously being an older person, but you know, we have normalized comedy. That somebody put in a question, and I think that was to Lucy or someone, or was it Abby, about manuscripts. If we want to look at questions, we could then read questions, or maybe Lucy could give us another Alan Bennett quote to cheer us up while we cover because I thought that was a
I only
marvelous
made a note
quote.
of one just to sound clever. That's all.
No, I love the Alan Bennett.
Have you guys been struggling at all this last year with everything that's going on? Are you writing, Helen?
I've just been sailing through, you know me, Mrs. Optimist. No, I've really struggled. I'm writing my memoir, and in the lockdown period and running Quip, it's been a very, and I want it to be funny and I want it to be sad, because obviously life is, and it's been a very what do either of you do? I mean, I think a lot of people have maybe finished their books, that's why we've got so many, but very going back over your life thinking, oh, I've made so many mistakes. So it's quite selfish. If only 20 years ago I hadn't said that to so and so, or I hadn't two-timed the person, you know, like you're going through all the bad behaviors. What about you? Is there a sort of melancholy that COVID has drawn out in your writing?
For me, maybe that's why I've been trying this other genre. Yeah, because I mean, we wanted to talk about how do you write funny with all this unfunniness going on. And I mean, I think it's important to sometimes say you can't always. And I think that's been a big important thing for me in the last year. I did write bad choices last year under the lockdown, but I do think this last like lockdown was so much worse.
Give us a teaser, because I'm loving the way you're linking everything. You're brilliant. I realize that's what you do as well. You do this for a living. But with the bad choices, what was the prompt for the bad choices, and make the connection through illustrating your book and melancholia maybe?
Well, bad choices came about. I don't know. I love writing. I love writing love stories that aren't sort of traditional love, and like, so it's about a 20-year friendship, and it is every chapter skips a year ahead to their joint birthday, these two characters, Zoe and Natalie. And it was such a joy to write, but a big part of it, with everything going on, had to be me sort of letting myself off the hook a lot of the time, and just sort of saying, today I am too miserable. I've seen too much of the news. I've read too much awful things and stats and stuff. And I just have to go for a really long walk with my dogs and just forget about it, or do something completely different, do some other work that I needed doing. And I think, and quite often when you do let yourself off and do take yourself away, that's also quite often when inspiration then strikes again, and you find yourself trying to write notes on your phone while your dog's having a poo and cyclists are trying to come by.
It's funny.
It's but I think that's really important to
did it take you longer? Because I know you are now writing, you're in your sort of like real go prime mode with your 5 books, 5 years, whatever, 4 books, but like, did you take longer than you would have done for your 4th book?
I definitely took longer to start it, because there was a point where I was sort of desperately just reading the news every day, constantly, all day, every day, and I just couldn't get myself into anything else. And I did have to kind of cut myself off. It was like some awful ex-boyfriend that you can't stop obsessing over on Facebook or whatever. You have to just cut yourself off.
And you had to caretake.
Yeah, I had to really stop myself doing that in order to actually do some work.
And you did it, so I can't wait to read. And Bad Choices, I love the negativity in it. I'm so attracted to negativity. Abby, I just understand negativity. And Abby, did you have that before we go to questions, which is really exciting? People have asked us questions, but Abby, with how that, to bring us all together, how was your lockdown with the writing?
Tough. I think it was the summer in particular, which was pretty bleak. But just before we went into the first lockdown, I got up to, I had a research trip planned, and I did manage to get up to it. And then literally about 5 days after I came back again, we went into lockdown. So it was good that I managed to get up there, because my The Sister Surprise, which is coming out in June, is set in a very remote part of the Scottish Islands in a fictional village. But the fact that we were able to get up there and speak to people and see what the sense of the place is like and how long it takes to go from one place to another. And I dragged my partner along to a ceilidh, which I enjoyed immensely.
Ceilidh. And we could do a ceilidh soon now.
I know, it's like it's the most like anti-COVID sort of activity you could possibly do. Or in fact, it's swapping multiple partners, touching multiple people.
It's like the Liverpool last
fantasy
joy being together.
Yeah.
So is your book, is there a Kaylee, before we go to questions, I just need to know, is there a Kaylee in Sister Surprise?
There is, and there is a man who we met at that, Kaylee, who was, I mean, I think he was 62, but he looked a solid 30 years older than that. And he danced by himself. Voice.
I love your language. A solid, looked like a solid. I love it. Anyway, sorry, it's just like you look a solid. But so this is but Sister Surprise is you. So you got a taster of it. Then lockdown. Then we all. That's good that you reminded us, because when we looked at, it was so isolating for us all. I didn't really talk to many people. Did you?
I think sometimes I was going back through my manuscript and there were sections where I had literally written in caps, insert something funny here. Oh, because I just couldn't feel it at the time, and so it took afterwards where I was just like,
well, you should have phoned me up. I could have given you some jokes from the biggest book of blokes ever. So now we're going to be given some questions, because apparently it's not just been the three of us in a lovely room drinking. So would you like to ask some questions to the very successful novelists?
Thank you guys for such a brilliant session. I've had the best time just listening to you. It's so much fun. Great.
I'm so red in the face. I'm at my mum's and she has the heating on 73 at all times.
Turn it down. I've just got yellow foundation my end.
All these
anyway,
over myself. Sorry, go on.
Joanna, what happens now? What do you read them out?
We have 4 questions. They're coming in. We'll go from there's one question in the chat, which I will read to you first, and then we have some from the Q&A box. So I'll start with Tamara's question, which is, do you get feedback on your manuscripts from people who have a similar sense of humour to you, i.e. your friends, or do you deliberately try and reach out to people who don't laugh at the same things as you?
Abigail?
Lucy, go Lucy, then Abigail.
I don't let anyone else read it other than my agent and editor, and I know that is unusual. It's just that I'm so aware of how subjective humour is, and the editing process for me is the worst part. I love the writing, but then editing it, I'd almost rather throw it in the bin and start again. So if I get too much feedback, and I hear this all the time from my other author friends, they'll give it to 2 friends who will give them opposite feedback, and that's and I just wouldn't know what to do with that.
Despair.
So yeah, exactly.
It would be despair.
Only hear from my editor, who is the one who pays my bills, like what she thinks, and change whatever she needs. But I actually don't talk. You
don't show it even to your loved one, assuming you do have a loved one. Sorry, it was an assumption.
I have many loved ones, Helen.
You're very lovable. So you're number one lovable? No, not given. Abigail, what do you do? I totally agree with that, Lucy. What do you do, Abigail?
Definitely no one reads it until the manuscript is completely at length, because it's too fragile at that point, and then you could just have someone pull at a strand and then just the whole thing unravels, and it's just a nightmare. So yeah, I wouldn't show it to. I think what I do beforehand is, if I'm unsure about like a situation or a scenario, I'll just describe it to my editor on like a Zoom call and be like, I'm thinking of doing something based with
you play it down as well.
Vaccinating pigs. Do you think something vaccinating pigs would be funny? And then and they're like, go for it. So I usually sort of seek support.
But that's being like careful. You're kind of being safe. You're giving yourself a safety net, because you're not completely owning it. You're chucking out. Now, if I'm trying to do stand-up material, which obviously I do try and do, if my other half doesn't have a sense of humour, just saying, and so no, I'm just saying same one. Sorry, correction. Doesn't have the same sense. So if you try out, it's sacred. I think what we're saying is it's sacred. So that, and that sounds so twatty, but if you working on something and you put it out and then nobody laughs, this is for me more verbally version than both of you in your writerly way, you just go, oh my God, you've killed that. You've killed a whole routine. You single-handedly have spoiled what could be an amazing one-woman show. Do you know what I mean? So it's best not to share.
It's such a fragile time when you're writing or like have something, and honestly, like a raised eyebrow at the wrong moment from somebody, and I'm like, right, it's all in the bin. It's gone. Forget it. I hate it.
It's
I
killed.
hate
It's killed.
I'm done.
So an evidence by the success of both you is like, you don't need to answer the question, perhaps you don't need to, just keep it close. And with your agent, if you're fortunate enough to have such good agents and editors, then you're in a pact and you want the same goal, and this trust, it's an implied trust. So good to have more questions.
We have another question from Akela, who says, how difficult is it not to use analogy, situations, etc. in one book in any subsequent books you write? It must be difficult to remember every little thing you've written. So do you keep a log?
I think Lucy's got to answer that because she's written more than everybody in the room.
Well, I don't know if I have. I think I probably have. Isn't that awful? Because I don't reread my books, and I do definitely. Because I've interviewed quite a few authors, and I remember saying to Sophie Kinsella, who's written like 30 books, how do you keep track of the names? This is the thing, because you might use 30 names in a book, and then you get to the next book and you're like, I don't know any names. I've run out of names. And when you imagine having written like 30 books, and I can't do the maths on that, but it's impossible. I really don't know what the answer is to that question, because I don't know if there's a huge way around it, except rereading your own books, and I can't really do that, because I feel like I would hate it again, and it's all just very.
I don't think many people do read.
A very difficult juggling act with your ego, of like keeping your ego high enough so that you can keep writing and believing in yourself enough to hand that manuscript over just to a professional, and like the smallest thing can come crashing down.
What was the question? I love that. What was the question again precisely? No, but I like the answer. But what was the question?
So it was how difficult is it not to use analogies or situations in one book and then not use them again in another book? How do you?
Oh, thank you. So you were going with the names. What about you, Abby, on your second one?
I would say that, well, definitely with the first, I was using sort of my own lived experience quite a lot. With the second, and I'm writing the third at the minute, I've basically mine friends' anecdotes and experiences, and like something that happened to their friend, so just to get outside of my own bubble. I mean, it's an extended bubble, isn't it? But things that cropped up in other people's lives, so that I know that it's not recycling the same thing. But I did have somebody point out to me that I use the word Constantina maybe 3 or 4 times in both books to comically describe someone's appearance. Yeah, so I thought
Constantina. I've never used that.
And then I was like, I'm sure it's not that
60.
much. Yeah, and I control F'd it in my manuscript, and it was like 4 results. I was like,
I definitely use the F word too much. I remember my editor for the last one came back and was like, so I've checked and you've used fuck like 400
Do you
times?
use the whole, you don't do a star, do you do just all the letters?
No, I love a swear word, don't you?
Put that in. You're not frightened, are you? You're not a frightened woman, which helps in life. That's really interesting. Yes. Would I put fucking? I might have put a fucking losing it. Or I might not, but that's the first novel. So interesting about subsequent. Very interesting question. Are there more of that level of interest?
I think we've actually got.
Have been interesting.
Yes, I think we've actually got probably more questions than we have time for. So we have to finish up in about 2 minutes. But so we have some questions about Quip. And
just slip one in on Quip, if I may.
You've got to submit, everybody. Anyone who's watching and thinking about putting in an entry, please do. It's absolutely amazing competition. And just
Lucy, you are very good. And the word entry, you see, I'm thinking could be humorous about entry, but we've got 3.5 more.
About penises again, Helen.
I know, because it's just the day I went off and did another job and just remembered that then you can do other things, and then you have to get back into being an admin librarian person, which is
An
a
excellent
very,
one
very
too.
important thing to do. It's a stretch for me. The point being to that question is that we have 3.5 weeks, and the winner of the person who puts in their novel synopsis gets a publishing deal. I mean, everyone would have got, I mean, these are great authors here, but it just fast tracks it, and it's nice, and we need the standard to be high. Thank you. Answer to that question.
I think what we might have to do, you guys are all active on Twitter, aren't you? So if the audience still have any further questions for you, can I direct them to your Twitter accounts to ask you there? But I will finish up with one short question, which was from Andy Mann. Many stand-up comedians have had to make decisions about having virus-free routines in 2021. Have you, as comedy writers or comedy novelists, faced the same decisions to get rid of COVID entirely from your routines?
Yes, I have, for sure. The book I'm writing at the moment, I'm setting it against a calendar of 2019. So I'm just going back in time, just pretending, because I just feel like it's too soon. I think you need about at least a 2-year clear run after a particularly traumatic event to be able to look back on it with some sort of cynicism in a way that's not too close to the bone. So yeah, not at the minute for me anyway.
What about you, Lucy?
Bad choices, because it's set across 20 years. The final year is, well, the final couple of years is 2020 and 2021. So I did have to address it. And it was weird because obviously I wrote this sort of May time and assumed it would kind of be over by the 2021 part. So I have had to make a couple of like very quick concessions in the last sort of page proofs bit a couple of months ago, because obviously it is still ongoing. So yeah,
that'd be so interesting because you've set it contextually. I mean, both are very good ways. One, you don't, but
yeah, I wouldn't have, but because I've made so many cultural references, this is a very, like, I wanted it to be super nostalgic, like every year references the sort of stuff that was going on like at the time, and you know, MySpace and Facebook and everything's coming in, and so I couldn't really like pretend it. But I know that actually most authors I speak to have ignored COVID, pretended it didn't happen, or just kind of set it around it, like Abby was saying.
But you had to, because so that's two really amazing examples. Which is always a nice way to end a talk, when you say two amazing examples. And I just said that. Just yin and yang. Yin and yang.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much everybody for coming along.
Brilliant, thank you.
Keep us with any other questions. Sorry we didn't get through it. We just
yeah, we're gabbing.
No, it's lovely to have such a flowing conversation. I think I could have listened to this for a hell of a lot longer, but unfortunately we do have another session starting in 3 minutes, so I'm going to have to end you there. Thank you so much for being a part of the festival.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for your very intelligent, searing question. Bad choices, Sister Surprise, Comedy Women in Print. Yay. And then the music comes and some drumming.